Okay, so, well, let's begin. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I think it's necessary to start with this plurality of greetings in the view of the fact that we are called to this meeting by researchers from 3 continents. So whatever your location is, you are very welcome. In this session, we are going to try to reflect on the basis that can serve to configure a joint line of work on the theme of the construction of emerging rights. In this sense, I would like to emphasize that there are 2 fundamental dimensions to the perspective of this task. On the one hand, the perspective of shared work within the institutional academic framework of international public law society. And on the other hand, the detection of what will be the inspiring principles of the theme in question. In relation to the first dimension, the promoters of this project have considered that the framework of the interest groups recognized by ICONs is an appropriate framework for the promotion of a network characterized by a legal interdisciplinary impulse. We believe that this theme brings together, at the very least, the work of the philosophy of law within the contributions of constitutional law and the perspective of public international law. We also consider that it favors the continuity of academic work with the contributions coming from the exercise of legal practice carried out by legislative, governmental, and judicial institutions, both at the state and international level, as well as by the activity promoted by lawyers and civil society organizations, which are the fundamental space for the implementation of advances in this field. In relation to the second dimension, we consider that the pointed issues raise questions that could be identified as general theoretical issues, as well as special issues relating to specific rights. In the first sense, first issue will lie in the conceptualization of the emergence of rights, including their genetic, normative, and systemic dimensions. With the genetic perspective, I mean that the emergence of new rights requires the study of the deliberative and justifying processes of these new rights, or new dimensions of traditional rights. With the normative perspective, I mean the emergence entails the study of the normative interactions between institutions on the transformation of the legally recognized rights into fundamental rights, or conversely, the judicial recognition of new fundamental rights. In the third, what are the consequences that this dynamic of restructuring the recognized rights entails for the constitutional structure of the constitutional democracies? In short, I believe that these ideas could be synthesized into, on the one hand, how many rights and how much justice is justified in the enterprise of the emergence of rights. On the other, what implications has this process regarding the dynamics of the separation and collaboration of powers? And finally, what kind of constitutional theory supports this process of emergency of new rights? In the second sense, the key thematic areas in which we suspect the emergence of new rights can be generated could be synthesized into 5 fundamental dimensions. First, what could be called the updating of classical rights as a result or effect of the development of the so-called new technologies, especially in the fields of artificial intelligence and computer revolution, and in the fields of biotechnology. Secondly, what some of the literature in use has called the promotion of democracy, which includes a plurality of aspects ranging from the so-called right to democracy to the deepening of the right to participation and deliberation, the rights to transparency and accountability, as well as those relating to democratic configuration of the frameworks of the demos. Thirdly, the rates associated with the ecological transition will be particularly relevant as they open up a field of enormous potential for the development of new rights, ranging from the rights of nature, the environment, animals, future generation, etc. Fourthly, the so-called cultural rights could be mentioned, covering the dimension of rights of identity, including multiple aspects such as those of a sexual nature and sexual orientation, linguistic, indigenous people, etc. Finally, rights relating to poverty, with a clear projection in the area of the development of social rights and distributive justice. In short, I believe that we have a theoretical and practical concern about the reflection of the new frontiers of fundamental rights that can be channeled through one of the ICON's interest groups. If the proposal is definitely accepted, we will start working on the design of a collective work initiative and the consolidation of a growing group in international projection. So thank you, and I would like to invite to the other people to express their ideas about the project. So perfect. Perhaps who will be the next one?
Well, actually, what if we start with those who are participating remotely?
Okay,
I think that will be better. So could we start with you, IGER?
Okay, perfect.
Would that be okay? Can you unmute yourself?
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I would like, first of all, thanks, Chema, for the initiative to organize this interest group or reflection group in which I participate because my interest in the subject, and first of all, with the intention to establish a link with the work of a Spanish chapter of International Society Public Law. For me, when we speak of new rights, like Chema said, we think about the extension of rights recognized and protected in the normative sources or in the traditional warranty system of procedures, especially the jurisdictional system. But when we speak about the rights of future generation, is my subject, my point of interest in this moment, the rights of future generation. Then when we speak about that, we don't really speak of new rights, but rather, in my opinion, of mechanism for the conservation of conditions that today can be considered rights or can be considered goods of generalized and common enjoyment. We can also call them natural, cultural, and biological resources. But this one is not, I know, the usual approach to this issue. What is of concern when talking about the rights of future generation is the question, on the one hand, of the subject of rights, the titular of rights, of the holder of rights, and in the other hand, we speak about the identification of the ultimate right, basically the right to preservation of environment. In the other words, most of authors, most of researchers speak about the configuration of the holders in certain rights. Principally, I said that the rights of children or the adolescent or the unborn, or rights of people not born in this moment. In the other hand, the essential axis around which the reflection on rights of future generation has revolved in the past and continue to revolve it now concern the preservation of environment, as stated in, for example, the 1922 Stockholm Declaration and in the Portland Report in 1988, or in several Nations Union resolution. But the approach can be more open-ended, as can be seen in the 1994 La Laguna Declaration, and it also refers to social rights, cultural rights, principal heritage, conservation, and economic rights. I mean, it's not only environmental rights, it's not only environmental transition, it's something else. For me, it's something else. The problem with working on these rights from a rights holder perspective is that this approach can be conflict with several ideas that I not share. For example, with the idea that only born persons are rights holders, accepting with another approach, let's say, in the territory, especially in the area of sexual and reproductive rights, which is the idea that each generation must define its own normative framework and recognition rights. With the anthropocentric vision of the world that prioritize the individual vision of rights and ignore absolutely the collective and intergenerational dimension. That can conflict too with the idea of the democratic configuration of rights and with the procedural representation of interest of future generation. So for me, my perspective in this research, in this point of interest about rights of future generation, for me it's necessary to move on from the notion of representation of future generation in discussion and conflict over the management of natural, cultural, and biological resources. It's necessary to reflect, about the limits to right development in order to guarantee the enjoyment of future rights. It's necessary to speak about the coexistence of the rights of future generation with the human development of present generation. It's necessary to speak about mechanism for guaranteeing rights to ensure their conservation and future exercises, and it's necessary to open the notion of rights of future generation. It's necessary to speak more about the configuration of rights now to preserve it in the future, and speak about the holders of rights. And that is the perspective for me for my research in the next 2 or 3 years. And that is the perspective I would like to share with you in this group of interest. Thank you
so much, IGER. Thank you. So
thank you. So who will be the next one?
can we move on with those who are joining us remotely? So Valeria.
Okay, Valeria.
Will it be okay for you to start? Okay. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you. How are you? I prepare a very, very short presentation to share. I promise that it's very short, but I cannot share it now. Is possible for you to change this?
Give me a second to see whether, because I think I'm going to have to name you as a co-host, perhaps somehow.
I think so. Yes, is that the way?
Give me 1 second. So make co-host. Right. I just did it. Can you share now?
Okay, I will tell you.
Mm-hmm.
It is very short. It's only to organize some ideas. Well, in first place, thank you very much for the invitation to be here and to share some ideas about this emerging rights concept and, well, and emerging group too. So I was only want to share with you, sorry.
No worries, take your time. And you've been co-hosted, so at any moment you can share it on the screen.
Are you seeing the presentation or not?
Not yet, actually.
Okay, okay.
It's okay.
Well, this is only to show you what we are doing here in Argentina. I am professor in the Universidad Nacional del Litoral, and I am researcher in CONICET, is the National Research Council here in Argentina, and we are working about the right of nature. And I think that is the reason, because of Jose Mari invited me to be here in the Emerging Right group. And we are working here about several topics on right of nature, and I think it's a good topic to work as an emerging rights. And when I was thinking about what to share with you today, I organized 4 things that are the things that we are working here. The first one is studying the constitutions, the law, and the jurisprudence here in our region about right of nature. Well, it's very famous, the Ecuador experience. Digno is here, and he's working a lot about that, and the jurisprudence in Ecuador too. And there is another topic that is less well known, that is the reinterpretation of existing law in another way. And then there is some new ideas and new concept used by the civil society organizations and the society in general to refer to environmental conflicts that are in relation with this ecocentric term that we say here in Latin America. And then we have another judicial decisions that are not related with countries that have the right of nature in their legal system, but they are some close ideas to this emerging right of nature perspective. In relation with the first topic, well, here you see that we have some constitutions, Ecuador, Bolivia, national laws in Bolivia, some provinces in Latin America where the right of nature are part of the legal systems, is the case of Mexico, Colombia, and some local regulations in the case of Brazil or Argentina. So we have different regulation in different scales that are recognizing the right of nature or recognizing right for a specific ecosystem or a specific regions in particular. And then we have here 2 groups of jurisprudence or judicial decisions. There are some important decisions in the country where the right of nature are already recognized. Ecuador is a very important case. And there is another very important group of cases in another countries where the right of nature are not recognized in their legal system, but the tribunals started to do an interpretation in that way. So they introduced their right of nature in the judicial decisions. One opening decision in that way is the Atrato River in Colombia. So we have like 2 ways about the right of nature recognition now in this part of the world. Another important topic that is happening right now, and we are trying to connect with the right of nature idea, is the reinterpretation of current law. There are another important discussions and studies from scholars from different parts of Latin America that are trying to look again the legal system, the current legal system, and they are trying to relate this current legal system with the right of nature. This is the case, for example, of the idea of obligation to repair environmental damage. This is something that is present, for example, in our constitution in Argentina, and that was reinterpreted here as the right to restoration is part of our constitution. Then there is another important topic happening now, that is the reinterpretation of some concepts that are part of the constitutions. In the case of Argentina, we have the idea, this is a picture of our constitutional article that recognizes the right to a healthy environment. And here we say all the inhabitants has the right to a healthy environment. And there are some scholars that started to look again at the concept of inhabitant. And in Brazil, something similar is happening with the context, with the concept of everyone. everyone has the right to a healthy environment. So they are trying to say, well, the right of nature, the right of ecosystems and animals, for example, are already in our constitutions if we do another interpretation of these words that are part of our constitutional agreements here. And then there is another topic that is related to scholars from indigenous rights and environmental rights that are trying to put together and put in dialogue the constitutional, the right to a healthy environment in the Constitution with the recognition of the ethnic and cultural preexistence of indigenous people. This is the case, for example, of Argentina. There is a group of people that started to say, well, there is an opportunity to think in an ecocentric way or in another way, the more anthropocentric perspective about the environmental law. Then we have another topic that is more related with a more sociological perspective or anthropological perspective that is related with the way that the civil society organization and the society in general is trying to name the environmental conflicts. And this is a very paradigmatic case here in Argentina that from protecting the wetland, that is a way to refer to a very important problem we have here with the protection of wetland. They started to say, we are wetlands, being a wetland, somos humedal. This is another way to express a conflict, that is a new way to express conflicts. And this is the first case, but it's not the only one. So there are some people from sociology trying to, specifically from sociology and environment people that are trying to study these new ways to announce and to present the environmental conflicts. And to finish, because I think I'm in time, we don't have this is a specific perspective from Argentina. We don't have here a regulation as in Ecuador. We don't have here a paradigmatic case as the Atrato River, but we have here some judicial decision from the Supreme Court that are closer. They don't recognize the right of nature, but for example, there are some cases where the Supreme Court started to talk about the ecocentric or systemic perspective about the regulation of water as a new legal paradigm. And they also make a reference to the interest of the system itself. So it's not a recognition as in the Atrato River, it's not the recognition of the right of nature as in Ecuador or in Bolivia, but it's an idea that is close, or we can introduce in this bigger process that is presented as the ecocentric turn or ecocentric perspective here in Latin America. And the other, and this is the last thing I wanted to say you, is that there is a current application of the indubio pro natura. And this is another idea that is being considering close to the right of nature recognitions, to think about the nature as a subject in a way that you have to take into account when you need to decide on an environmental conflict. So, well, thank you very much, and thank you again for the invitation to be here.
Thank you very much, Valeria. So, Isabel, would you like to join in?
The macro.
Yeah, and please unmute yourself. Yes.
Okay. So, good morning for me from Italy, and I'm very glad to take part to this meeting of the ICON Interest Group, and I'm grateful especially to Jose Maria Sauca for giving me the opportunity to be here. Among my main fields of research, there are legal feminist studies. And in this context, I think that the broad category of emerging rights can offer some tools for rethinking women's human rights, taking into account women's claims and interests. Especially, I am interested in the topic of reproductive rights that can be analyzed as a paradigmatic case which demand human rights protection in a gender perspective. We know that the core of the reproductive rights basically consists of rights to freedom, mainly the freedom to decide whether to have children or not. But around this right of freedom, which requires the absence of interference, revolve some social rights instrumental to the free exercise of reproductive choices, such as the right to reproductive health, the right to access all information concerning contraceptive method and technique available for medical assisted procreation. So, reproductive rights involve choices that affect all persons, regardless of sex, gender, and sexual orientation, but they particularly affect women, given that at least to date, it takes a female body to come into the world, and the reproduction is not only a biological, but also a social fact. As the feminist perspectives have pointed out, this exclusive generative power of women has traditionally been felt as a threat to male supremacy in the social sphere, and the need to limit this power has historically justified very pervasive mechanisms of control over women's bodies and lives. In recent years, we know that important progress has been made in the legal recognition and protection of reproductive rights, which testify to the awareness of thinking about these rights from the singularity of women's bodies and experience. Despite the undoubted progress, or perhaps even because of it, the signs of the backlash that Susan Faludi spoke about back in the early 1990s have become stronger. Let's consider, for example, the movement against the legal abortion, from the Dobbs case in the United States to the offensive the Eastern European countries, or the policies of forced sterilization that are still carried out in different parts of the world, which respond to the same logic of control of women's bodies and lives. In the face of these backlashes, which obviously hit women victims of intersectional discrimination, such as women in condition of poverty, or migrant women, or women with disabilities, the need arises to undertake what has been called an original legal thought, that is an inclusive analysis of women's rights, taking into consideration their specific perspective and interest in relation to the context of interaction and exercise of rights. In this direction, the notion of emerging rights can be considered useful in the view of giving conceptual autonomy as subjective rights to especially feminine interests, such as those mentioned in relation to reproduction. The further hypothesis that it could be interesting to investigate is that these new rights could also have a valuable potential as instrument of guarantee, insofar as they would allow a more adequate protection of women's rights. And these are the ideas that I would like to share with you and the interest group. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Thank you so much. And I've just seen that we have Edgardo Rodriguez. He has just joined us. So Edgardo, if you hear us and if you see us, you are more than welcome to unmute yourself and make your points. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good midnight at Peru. Good afternoon there in New Zealand, in Spain. Yes, my point concerning this seminar, this web seminar, is the what motivated Peru to develop a national action plan on business and human rights. Essentially, in July 2017, the members of the working group of business and human rights visited Peru. They meet with the Peruvian government. I work as a director in the human rights department of Ministry of Justice and Human Rights, and United Nations proposed that the public policies should incorporate especially the guiding principles of business and human rights. It was an opportunity to start the implementation of the United Nations Protect, Respect and Remedy framework. 7 months before that year, in 2017, the Ministry of Justice and Human Rights had begun to elaborate the third national plan for human rights for the period 2018-2021. And in that context, some European countries, such as United Kingdom and Netherlands, had offered technical support if Peru wanted to adopt international standards of business and human rights. In the meeting with the members of the United Nations Working Group on Business and Human Rights, the government received the conclusions of a preliminary report which revealed some difficult situations concerning the rights of indigenous people, the environmental degradation, and the increasing social conflict, the dangers for informal economy workers, child and forced labor, among other problems. 17 subjects required the Peruvian state intervention, so it was necessary to call formal companies for searching collective responses. In July 2017, the Ministry of Justice and Human Rights expressed its commitment to include in the National Plan for Human Rights for the period 2018-2021 a new policy guideline for developing business and human rights standards through the first National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. These standards are the guiding principles of the United Nations, but it is important also to consider the ILO and OECD principles. After in the process of elaboration of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, the Peruvian government has identified especially the labor-related human rights of vulnerable people such as women, LGBTI, migrants, older adults, people with disabilities, Afro-Peruvian persons, indigenous peoples, among others. The discrimination against them limits their access and stability at work, so they have reduced the social security and unemployment benefits. Considering that 70% of economically active population are informal workers, their labor rights are not protected. So that the National Action Plan is working on measures to guarantee access to work without discrimination. Along with companies, the collective aim is fostering and strengthening gender, intercultural, and disability approaches. Besides, formal companies and state actors have boosted a space for discussing with human rights organizations, unions, and indigenous peoples about the negative impact on rights and informal economic activities. Actually, the National Action Plan has have a result of a participative process with many actors. 5 social sectors have started a dialogue in search of consensus: government first, companies second, third, human rights organizations, 4, unions, and finally indigenous peoples. 130 representatives discuss their views and proposals based on reports elaborated for the most respected Peruvian universities. The government leads this process, the executive power through the representatives of all the ministries, put the emphasis on investment promotion, public companies, public procurement, state contracts, environmental monitoring, and among others. Almost 30 agencies are assessing public policy commitments. The most important companies are well represented by the Confederation, by the Confederación Nacional de Instituciones Empresariales, the private sector, which leads the global compact in Peru. The most prosperous extractive companies are also represented by the National Mining, Petroleum and Energy Society, and human rights organizations have a solid platform which expresses demands of vulnerable groups such as women, child, human rights defenders, older people, LGBTI persons, indigenous peoples, among others. The most important central unions have an important role in the dialogue, and the more representative organizations of indigenous people have a chance to express their concerns to government and companies. The advantage of a wide process of actors participating in the dialogue is that it offers an opportunity to identify the crucial problems that must be included in the National Action Plan. The challenges are concentrated in the search of consensus. It is going to be an easy task to achieve unanimous consensus on strategic actions that must be included in the plan, but especially companies could also resist some politics on due diligence according to international standards, for example. Nowadays, the project Responsible Business Conduct in Latin America and the Caribbean, conducted by an alliance of ILO, Office of United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the OECD, has promoted many opportunities to exchange some experiences of developing national action plans in the region. Good practices are challenges during the process of elaboration of public policies on business and human rights politics have been the subjects discussed with government officials of Costa Rica, Ecuador, and Chile. Besides, there are some bilateral activities between states according to international policies on cooperation. And since 2020, some meetings have started with Chilean and Colombian government officials to interchange information, experiences on technical and digital instruments for monitoring public policies. And right now, Chile and Peru have a constant meeting with the aim of organizing an international web seminar on public policies on human rights. The commitment of companies in the process of elaboration and implementation of the national action plans on business and human rights has been expressed gradually. A collaborative agenda is projected step by step with formal companies, civil society organizations, and government. The most important Peruvian companies are convinced that the framework of business and human rights and sustainable development relates to better economic activities and social impact in local communities. Thus, their investments could be safe and their social aims warranted. For example, a better understanding during processes of prior consultation of indigenous people, which have been developed in context of social conflict, could create trust between communities, companies, and government actors. There are also opportunities of better investments. So the inclusion of vulnerable people in economic activities is also an opportunity to improve companies' productivity. For example, greater gender equality in economic opportunities contributes to stronger and more sustainable economic growth. OECD has established that it increases labor productivity and the available talent pool, which provides businesses with greater opportunities to expand, innovate, and compete. So we have worked all these years directly with defenders in civil society organizations and the Catholic Church in rural areas, and we have acquired a rich experience working with peasants and defenders and indigenous defenders, and we have trying to introduce the new agenda of remediation that could lead a better response to reparation when the negative impact of companies' economic activities are in place, especially in the Andean and Amazonic region, not only in Peru, but in all the countries of the Amazonic basin. This is a new agenda on human rights. There are 4 national action plans on business and human rights. So it is an emergent subject on this matter, and it is a part of public policies in Peru and other countries, especially in Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, and Chile. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edgardo. So I think we've just concluded with the interventions by our remote participants. So I think that now we can move on to our actual participants here in the room. So what about Gonzalo? Would you like to join us on this table, actually? And I will make sure that everyone has a great visual of your presentations. Thank you so much. Yes, if you can, just exactly as far up as possible. Up, further up.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to Jose Maria and to all the people who want to work in this interest group. So I don't have any presentation, but I want to say that I'm interested in the interest group. I think that that is the main idea to work in the development of the new kind of rights or new kind of. For me, especially for the rights of nature also, many people also talk about the Atrato River case and that decision. I was involved in that decision because I worked in the Constitutional Court at that time. And the idea of giving rights was because of also from one invitation that I have here in New Zealand 7 years ago from Joel Colon Rios. So we exchanged some ideas related with constitutional amendments, but then he told me about that the Wangani River have, or that the New Zealand Parliament have an act from the Parliament to recognize the personhood of the Wangani River. So when I came back to Colombia, we have to work in the Atrato River's decision. So I told about the New Zealand experience and Justice Jorge Iván Palacio like the idea. So we try to build that also the case in comparative perspective with the New Zealand Wangani law. So the Constitutional Court at the end took that idea to give the personhood for the Atrato River, and then because then became like a spread of the same kind of decision in many other cases related with rivers, especially with the Magdalena River, Cauca River, another Cocora River, and other rivers from Colombia. Also, tribunals and judges gave the person who for rivers. And right now, the decision is implemented for the different institutions and also by the guardians. We have a different, we saw that, or the Constitutional Court tried to have also as model the Guangani River, that was like how one guardian from the government and one guardian for the indigenous communities. But when the Constitutional Court wants to do the same, the community said that they want all the guardians from the community. So it was more than 14 guardians for the community. And so in some way, the community changed the decision because they want also to participate as they want to participate, not as the Constitutional Court model, but their own way to do it. And right now, after almost 7 years of that decision, things change with the Atrato, but the effectiveness of the decision is not so as we hope that the mining and the other things that happen in the Atrato, maybe with the contamination of the river with many substances, was stopped. But I think that it's a development decision. We build also the decision trying to thinking about the case in Argentina with the Riachuelo cases, and also we try to mix many things related with not that the court have the obligation to make like in other decisions that they have to make like a special rule to try to say if the orders are followed or not. So they delegate that for 3 institutions, the Procuraduría and also the Ombudsman from Colombia and also the NGOs and the academy. They have to try to follow if the order of the Constitutional Court are follow or not. So that is my interest in the interest group. Try to
Thank you so much, Gonzalo.
develop more.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And then I would like to also invite Mariano Melero to the same table and kindly ask him to do the same thing with a microphone, if possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And I want to start by thanking Jose Maria Sauca for inviting me to participate in this interest group. And well, the aim of my contribution is to explore the emerging right to democratic governance. I will try to answer the question if there is human rights to democracy. From the beginning of our century, there have been lively debates between international lawyers and philosophers of law addressing the existence or emergence of an international customary norm of democracy, a regime that has usually been described as international democratic law, and whether or not this norm amounts to an actual human rights to democracy. In those debates, there were not only international democratic champions such as Fernando Tesson, Gregory Fox, or Tom Frank, but also important critics and challengers. In particular, there has been critics of the democratic or liberal peace projects and authors who defend anti-imperialism and post-colonialist postures. These criticisms express skepticism about the international human rights protects and international liberalism in general terms. Despite the longevity of the debate, there is not consensus on whether or not such a new human right exists. The debate continues around three central questions. Firstly, the nature of human rights to democracy, and in particular, whether it is a human right and why. Secondly, the justification of the human right to democracy, whether it is instrumental, for example, to peace, justice, or economic prosperity, or inherent, for example, related to dignity, equality, or other moral values. And thirdly, finally, various critiques such as the difficulty to justifying the alleged implications of the human rights to democracy in terms of military enforcement and intervention, its questionable universality in light of the thick notion of equality it allegedly relies on, and its compatibility with the principle of self-determination or non-democratic states. In all these debates, it's important to recognize that identifying new international human rights is a matter of sources of law and not of moral justification. However, once the existence of a human right is established as a valid norm under international law, its moral justification may eventually matter for its legitimacy. Therefore, elucidating the legitimate authority as opposed to the validity of the human rights to democracy under international law becomes, at least in part, a matter of either inherent or instrumental justification of a corresponding universal moral right. As I want to clarify, my interest is on the political conception of human rights, following authors such as John Rawls or Charles Bates or Joshua Cohen. My line of research will thus be to elucidate whether or not there is a human right to democracy in international law. And irrespective of whether or not such a right exists legally, whether that right could or should be justified as a human right in a moral sense, either as a natural right or as a conventional right. In any case, my work will presuppose that international law must protect the principle of individual equality and also specific individual rights to democratic participation. In conclusion, my proposal is to offer a conception that fits and justifies the state of the practice in international law. It will try to account morally for the current regime of international democratic law and for the fact that democracy is protected both as a general principle in international law on the one hand and as a set of specific human rights under international human rights law on the other, but not as a human right in itself. And that's all. Thank you very much.
So much, Mariano. So we had a little bit of a late start. So but would you still like me to switch positions and go over there? So I'm going to be sharing a few thoughts also, and then we will conclude. Thank you so much. Okay. Let me wire up myself. This one, just so I don't know how it works. How does it work? Well, whatever. I'm gonna be doing this actually, which is much better. So what I would like to do is to put some pressure on the very concept of emergence. In which sense? I want to make it a little bit more rigid. Rigid in which sense? Well, the very word emergence appears already in the philosophical discussion. I don't know how many of you are aware with the concept of emergent properties or emergent phenomena, for example, in philosophy of sociology or social ontology or in philosophy of biology. The idea more or less is that something is emergent, not simply because it is novel or new. There's something extra to it, which is what? It is also something that cannot be fully explained simply by investigating the ground materials out of which this new thing has emerged. So you can think as an analogy, the relationship between the laws of psychology, the verdicts of psychology, and the laws of biology. So some would say that you cannot make full sense of psychological laws simply by trying to reduce them or understand them through the spectrum of chemistry or biology or whatever. So by analogy, I'd like to say that we could also make sense of emergent rights as a kind of normative emergence. In other words, rights themselves, of course, are a normative concept. And being a normative concept, this emergence will be the emergence of something normative from something else that is also normative. And what is emergent about these rights is that these emergent rights cannot be fully understood through appeal to the background that has informed their emergence. And an example that I would like to further pursue as a matter of research has to do with the distinction between two types of what I consider to be cases of social rights. So one family of rights that I consider to be genuinely emergent is what I call social minimum rights. So the rights to the existence of a social minimum. The case of a universal basic income is one such case, okay? And I would like to contrast this family of rights that I consider to be emergent with another family of rights that I would call social fairness rights. So think of John Rawls's theory of justice. What is the difference between these two? Well, the first are emergent, the second are not. Why? Because rights that arise as a matter of social fairness are rights that emerge, if you like, or the emergence here is not the exact concept, that they become potent or relevant because there's already an underlying background of social cooperation within a particular political society. So these are more or less rights to a fair share of the product of social cooperation within a particular political society. So there's not, you could say that they're new in some respects. They can be new, for example, in terms of the generosity of their content, for example, but they're not emergent in the strict sense because there's already a background there. And it is because of that very background that we have certain interactions within a political society that make it the case that certain members of society should have an entitlement to a fair share of the product, the benefits, if you like, of social cooperation. By sharp contrast, in the case of, for example, the right to a universal basic income, okay, which is for some, this is also tends to become a universal human right, human social right. The idea is there is that we don't really have an underlying specific social cooperation. If you inspect the literature on the universal basic income, the idea is that this income should be literally universal across political societies. So it's not that it emerges out of a particular social interaction. If you like, this is a kind of a right that emerges from something like a very wide or imperfect duty of each and everyone to do what? To mitigate the negative impact of global interactions, if you like. These interactions cannot be fully, let's say, squeezed into the context of a particular political society. And that's why sometimes we feel a bit awkward about the very discussion of imagining a universal right across the globe. So global universal basic income. What would this function? And this is exactly the notion of emergence here. That is, you cannot fully understand, let's say, the content of such a right simply by inspecting the social interactions that are taking place in particular political societies. You have to raise above the context of these societies and try to see whether you can articulate the content of these rights in an independent manner. Thank you so much. And now I guess I'd like to give the floor to Jose Maria and for his concluding remarks.
There will be time for questions or comments at the end or maybe?
Well,
Again, please.
Okay.
yeah.
Well,
We are out of time, so
out of time, but well. Well, it doesn't work.
you can just hold it up.
My personal line of research in the context of the construction of emergent rights, and I will be very, very, very brief, will be developed in some aspect of the two theoretical dimensions I have outlined in the general presentation. Thus, in relation to the first, I will focus on the study of aspects related to changes in the theory of the Constitution and in the field of democracy promotion in the second. In the former, the reflection will deal with questions such as the dimensions of multi-level conception of sovereignty, the status of constituent power, the possibilities of constitutional modifications, and the evolution of the content of the Constitution. In the second, I believe that the fundamental reflection concerns the configuration of the demos or of the various demos concurrent in the configuration of democracy. Traditionally, the debates around the right to self-determination have been particularly problematic and resistant area to their acceptance in the logic of rights. Among the many examples that could be cited, an author as transcendent in the defense of rights as Ronald Dworkin, has concluded that these questions are merely matters of fact. However, in my opinion, to abandon the doctrine of human rights in these areas, which are potentially the most conflictive and violent at the present, seems to me to constitute an unacceptable dereliction of duty on the part of the academic reflection. Thus, the right to self-determination, the right to secession, the right to autonomy, the right to decide, the right to co-decision, the right to consultation, the right to collective political identity, the right to protection of collective identity, etc., are all expressions of this problem. Ultimately, it's a question of studying how democracy can channel the constitution of the conditions of democracy. So that could be my personal view on this interest group. Finally, we are out of time, but finally, I will say that it was expected to the participation of Ramiro Avila from Ecuador and the participation of Juan Antonio Cruz from Mexico, but probably there had been some problem with the connection. As well, Colin Shepard from Canada and Roisin Hennessy from Ireland have excused their attendance due to the time incompatibility. So finally, if this interest group is accepted by ICON's direction, we will begin to work together. So if there is any questions or any comment, that will be the moment, the time, and of course, everybody who has interest in the interest group, please write to the following address: derechoyjusticia@uc3m.es. And we'll be in contact, we'll be in touch. So that's your opinion, that's your chance. Please take the microphone.
I would like to get your.
Thank you. I will be. Yeah, I'm not sure. Or
Yes, I think it works. Yes. Thank you for the presentations. I just wanted to follow up in some of the presentations. I think it was yours that you said emergent rights are kind of a reflection on or materialization. That's something that is already going on, let's say. And I wanted to point out precisely in relation to the rights of nature, in the iconic case of the Wanganui River, precisely in the panel discussions we had yesterday, it was pointed out that in the case of the Wanganui River, the guardianship that was also granted to the Maori people who were already since ancestral time taking this figure of guardianship without a legal or a recognition, but still it was granted. So so I think it's quite an example of what you said in your presentation. It was something that already going on, but it has emerged as a
cannot be fully explained.
And now it kind of fits the argument of rights of nature, to which I think we should be very careful also, because since I think it's important to distinguish if it is a means or towards an end, or it's an end in itself. And I think probably in the climate litigation arena may work to achieve some aims like more ambitious carbon emissions reduction from countries, or more restorative policies regarding to nature. However, we should be careful about the use of the term rights to nature, because it kind of reinforces this anthropocentric or human-centered approach to nature. That's what they want.
Okay, thanks a lot. The form of the room.
Hi, my name is Aravind Ganesh, and I'm a postdoc researcher at Maastricht University. I have some genuine questions. First, for both IGER and for Valeria on ecocentric rights, as well as the rights of nature generally. The idea of the Anthropocene is all the rage in in a lot of literature right now. There are criticisms of it in that by sort of casting all human beings as a collective force terraforming or causing global the climate to change, it erases and forgets the fact that it's only certain people who have been historically responsible for both current and historical carbon emissions. There's another aspect of the Anthropocene, of this ecocentricity discourse, which I find alarming, which I think we should worry about, which I think hasn't been examined yet. And part of it has already taken place in this country, in the sense that in 2019, there was this mass shooter who, for environmental reasons, on pretexts, claimed that certain populations are over reproducing, and therefore it's the birth rates that need to be reduced. This sort of violent rhetoric has sort of crept into mainstream European politics. In France, Marine Le Pen's, part of her platform against immigration or refugee rights was that these people are parasites, are going to ruin the French countryside. So my question is, what resources does do sort of ecocentricity proponents have to challenge this kind of discourse, this overpopulation discourse? I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. So please, our remote panelists, you are more than welcome to address the points if you like. So you can unmute yourself, whichever IGER you want to go first.
The micro.
Just unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for your observation. I have not a clear idea. I am speaking about the necessity of change the perspective, because only one anthropocentric perspective is not enough to speak and to reflect about the future generation rights. But you have, it is true, it's difficult to change the perspective, because we have an anthropocentric perspective. We are human beings. It's normal to have this perspective. It's our formation, it's our background. But my point is, it's necessary to try to change this perspective, because it's not possible without our structure of thought, speak about future generation rights, because future generation rights speak about time, not about person in the present, in this moment. I don't know if I have answered your question. I don't know. I don't know if you have understood your question exactly.
Actually, we've run out of time, so I suggest that we move on to the, who was the other one you were asking a question about? So you address your question to two panelists.
Valeria.
Well, I think
You've been.
if we're running out of time, like it's I just
Well, it will depend on whether if anyone else would like to ask any further questions. We do have one. So if I may. Okay.
My name is Diego López Medina from Universidad de los Andes in Bogotá, Colombia. I want to express my interest on the interest group and also on the more theoretical part of it. And in von Herenga's in his piece on the heaven of political concepts has this last part about the philosophers of law, which are in a way an interest group like this. They were the ones who were inventing rights, as opposed to the idea of simply accepting or recognizing rights in legal reality, which was von Herenga's preferred metaphor for it. So I would sort of accept Trentafilo's proposal, but I will keep it a bit wider, because it seems to me that people who are either trying to recognize emerging rights, they do it with different language games.
Absolutely.
They talk about creating, inventing,
which is not the same.
Working for. There's a huge array of
Deducing it like as if it's a logical inference. No, it comes from what can be deduced logically from.
And the very idea of emerging sort of implies for me the idea of recognizing somehow that there's something which is, I mean, it tries to oppose the metaphor of inventing out of nothing.
Exactly.
But I'm not sure. I would like to sort of examine that furthermore. And it seems to me that it's not only what people do, but who's the people who are doing the thing. Again, going back to Herenga and Savigny, there were both popular forces in the creation of new rights and also technical forces or technical imaginations in the creation of rights. And I think there's also a combination between the political forces of the common man and the sort of technical forces of the lawyerly imagination that are both contributing to this emergence of rights. Of course, this interest group cannot be, I mean, our positivist friends wouldn't be here. I mean,
that's true.
Positivist. And we're still like celebrating the idea that beyond existing rights, there can be a development of further rights. But I would like to examine the metaphors that concur with that process.
This is actually, it's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So may I assume that we have reached the point of concluding this session?
We are 15 minutes out of time.
José María, if you want to say the final words.
So the final words is thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you very much to the people who is online.
Thank you, everyone.
And well, you remember the email address, that will be in contact. So thank you very much. I hope we are in contact. So
thank you, everyone. And good night or good day to all people who are outside of Oceania. So have a lovely night, have a lovely sleep. See you soon. Goodbye.